Welcome to Resisting Beta, the men's health podcast. And now, your host, Andrew Bontz. All right, man, welcome to another episode of Resisting Beta. I am your host, Andrew Bontz, and I am here with Marcus Murphy. And here are some questions I have for Marcus. And this is another unique episode where I reached out to a man that I respect that is doing some amazing things in the world, creating impact. And I want him to share his story with you in a little bit of a briefer episode here. So here are the questions I have for Marcus. I've known him for a while. It's probably been 5 or 6 years from a professional standpoint. And here's some questions that I think you might have for him. How do you do it all and succeed in life? But how do you maintain your values and who you are along the way and not lose yourself? How do you build key relationships with other people that truly open up doors and opportunities in your life and expand that thinking, that glass door or plateau that somehow is ingrained in some of us that you can't make more than a certain amount? Maybe that's 50 grand a year. Maybe that's 6 figures. Maybe that's 40. That is. And how do you level up that path to get there, especially as you're starting to get into your 30s and entering into your 40s, when you might feel like you're a little bit behind the 8 ball? You're Marcus, he's a husband, a father, he's a founder. His story about his new company is super exciting. I don't think we'll get too far into that, but you should check him out. He's in for some pretty amazing stuff. I love his curiosity in life, and his energy is one of the most attractive things about this gentleman. And I really appreciate having him as someone in my life, someone that I'm honored to have him on the podcast. So thank you, Marcus, for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Easy,
man. So the men don't know you yet. So can you just in a short version kind of tell the men a little bit about you and why you think I invited you to be on this podcast?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly because I'm so manly that I got to be on the show. No, man, it's really exciting. Anytime that we're able to speak to each other as like brothers and be able to come around other men, that's a really huge opportunity, because there's been so many people who have literally done that in my life. The reason why I thought this was so exciting is because if you track back any of my success in life, there was always a person who was sitting there wanting to invest into me as a mentor, as a leader, handing down to somebody who was his employee. But if you think about it like that, I can literally track back to all these really incredible men in my life. And here's the crazy part about me, which maybe a lot of your listeners are also dealing with. It's that my dad was absent growing up. So I didn't have a father, but I had father figures. So I had my grandfather, who was this unbelievable, incredible man in my life until I was 16 years old. Then I also had, are you familiar with Big Brothers Big Sisters program?
Yeah.
So I've had a big brother since I was 9 years old. He was the best man at my wedding. We've known each other now, obviously, for 30 something years. And he's been such almost a father figure to me. And then I've had a number of mentors along the way and all kinds of people who have just literally poured into my life. And so and what's crazy is those are men, like these really strong, unbelievably vulnerable, great guys who are balanced and way ahead of me in life, who just said, you know what, I'm going to be intentional. But also I sought them out. I really wanted to have those relationships. So when I get invited to a show like this, I'm like, of course, we need more of this, right? We need this as men.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate what you're working on and sharing your insights to some of the guys that might be struggling, might be stuck something right now.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with that when because you have a lot going on? You have a founder and a startup kind of going on. You do a bunch of money raising and moving and got 2 kids. How do you get through that? Maybe take me back to a moment when you felt stuck.
Yeah.
And what got you out of it?
All right. So last Tuesday, no, I'm just kidding. So no, really though, it's so funny because the amount of times, the ebbs and flows of a career like this. So for me, stuck is crazy, because most of the time stuck means I'm stuck, like me mentally, I'm stuck. And most of the time when I get stuck is what I've said to you before, which is that I get to a place where I don't feel like I can share that I'm stuck. And so, or that I need help. And a lot of times, because of the positions I've been in of leadership and being an executive at different companies, I like literally, it's so easy when you go, everyone's supposed to be turning to me. So I cannot be the one who needs help. So I'm always like, I'm supposed to help other people. And then there's this lie in the back of my mind, which is like, oh, you know what? I need to be unflappable and impervious, and I have to be the one that's in the front. So I can't have these issues and I can't be here. So I just kind of mask it, or I just overperform, or I invest in other people more. And the only problem is that ends up breaking. Right. It ends
Mhm.
up breaking, and it's never fun when that happens, because, and it's happened multiple times in my life. And a lot of it was just because I wasn't taking care of myself. So stuckness for me is in my mind when I get to a place where I feel like I can't ask for help. Right. And that usually has something to do with what everyone else's perception of me is. And so if you're a guy out here listening to this podcast, I know that we can probably relate to this. Like, I care a lot about what people think. And it is the hardest thing to beat back. But the stuckness that I feel is usually when that becomes the number one priority about what other people's perception of me is. And then it gets to a place where I end up isolated, alone, not feeling like anybody can relate to me, and that nobody would understand if I said that I needed help or that I was stuck. And I just think that it's not a specific example of being stuck, but I can tell you that those are the attributes that lead to being stuck. And it's funny, I will share one. So I've been an athlete. I think you were also an athlete, right? So I've been an athlete majority of my life. And then when that went away and I started to not be an athlete anymore, a piece of my identity died with that. And then all of a sudden I realized, by the way, that I kept eating like an athlete even after I wasn't athletic. And so for the last 15 years, my weight and my health have been up and down and up and down and up and down. The fluctuations that happen there are just constant. And I think that was also a really interesting part for me, because that's a direct correlation to feeling stuck, or when I'm at my worst, is that it externally shows because of what I'm, the carelessness with my health. And that neglect is really the biggest stuck that I get. And guess what? Isn't that a crazy, insane thing? I have this really unbelievably elevated perception of wanting other people to see me as successful and great, and an internal battle happening where I'm stuck. And so my external factor is that I get fatter. so so now I've got like, oh, I'm getting fatter and I'm getting like unhealthy, but like I care what other people think. Oh my gosh, like insanity, right? So I think that that part is interesting to me, is that the stuckness does definitely comes from wanting other people to feel like I'm okay and that I'm good. And then in the reality part is like not sharing that, because there's a bit of like, oh no, they're not going to think that way of me anymore. And so that stuckness is very dangerous.
And man, I think you said a few things there that I'll unpack one at a time. You had said something that meant something to me, is that identity of an athlete,
Mhm.
where we go to high school and then some of us play sports in college. I did. And you are in part of a team. And it's usually men's sports. There's leadership there. There's routine. There's discipline. And then you get out into the world, and you might be doing rec basketball where you play basketball and then you do a lot of drinking beer or softball or
Yeah.
whatever. But you lose something of that identity in that brotherhood, or because I played football
Yep.
and had that brotherhood and that teamwork there. And then I try to trace back my life. I'm like, when did I like, because you're an extrovert and I'm an introvert. So I struggled to build that community and make friends, because I just don't really want to deal with most guys' bullshit, to be honest. Because most guys thrive off of teasing each other and
Yep.
making driving the other one down
Yeah.
by making fun of him at some of his most biggest insecurities.
Yeah. Yeah. That's 100% our culture for sure.
Yeah, and it drives me nuts, man. So then I isolate. I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna lone wolf the shit out of this.
Yep.
And I, like you had said, I have to be this unflappable masculine presence. I can't ask for help. But I'm curious, like, because you also said you really believe in mentorship and you feel like that's kind of got
Oh
what you
yeah.
got out of the way, to where, because I think
Major.
that for me, I relied too much on my wife, where she
Yeah.
was, or my ex-wife, where she was the person I would unload to.
Yeah, sure.
And I was missing that mentor person. So
Yeah.
how did they help you? How did having that mentor and those relationships help you navigate through these stuck points and get
Yeah.
past these moments, and especially in identity changes and that kind of stuff?
It's really interesting. I'll name names, but I've had a few people in my life. There's been four men that have really been had the biggest impact on me at various stages. And at various stages of my life, those were also the moments where the stuckness happens, right? So as a young guy, as a teenager, I did have my grandfather. My grandfather was and still is in the Hall of Fame for horse training and is a unbelievably accredited and successful guy. But I spent every single day with him. And he also was from a different era. So it was really incredible to be around him because he had like that gentleman Southern kind of thing about him where, yeah, you better hold that door for her and you better say yes, sir, and no, ma'am. And being polite was really important to him. And then also just the idea of that hard work and like sticking to something for a long period of time. There is like this actual joy and payoff in it, right? There's something about that. He also endured a lot. He was a half black, and his parents were together back in the 18 whatever, they got married in 1870 in the South as a black man and a white woman, right? And so he's had this whole thing his whole life. He's been dealing with that. He also had to deal with segregation and all kinds of stuff, right? So what a powerful guy. Resilience is what I would say I pulled from him. The next guy in my life, and I think the resiliency, by the way, as a young guy, I was dealing with a lot going into being an athlete, going into being a student, being a teenager in an environment which was a crazy, high-paced, high-pressure environment of the high school that I went to. So there's a lot there. The next guy was my big brother, Dayton Hughes. And Dayton is this guy who came from a whole world I didn't. He came from a very wealthy background, grew up with all this privilege, and also was like a world traveler. And so I'm a kid from a small 100,000 person city, right? Who's never been anywhere. I'd never been out of my state until I was probably like 17 years old, never left the country, never did any of that stuff. So he really opened the world to me. And that was really huge too, because being stuck sometimes also means physically being stuck, like feeling like you can't go anywhere and you're just going to be there. And like what's life going to have? And it gets overwhelming because you're like, oh no, I'm missing out on something. So he opened the world to me and he showed me a whole different life that I could have and truly have been aspiring to have for a very long time. And then the other guy is a guy named Richard Linder, who is a co-founder of a company called Digital Marketer and Traffic and Conversion Summit and Scalable.co. And Richard was my direct leader. Like he was the president of our company when I was an executive on that team. And this guy poured into me, man. Do you know how many times I literally didn't deserve? I had so many people under me and I was trying my best to be, driving revenue and owning things. And I would literally just come in and he was a safe harbor for me. That's the best way I can describe it. He just said, yeah, come in and be your crappiest self. It's okay. When you're stressed out, when you're whatever, you don't go out there to your team and other people or your peers. You can only go up. And I want you to bring that to me. Right. And he was another person who invested in me. He was always shoving a book in my face and trying to tell me different things to do. And then finally, there's a guy named Brian Miles him and his wife co-founded a company called Belay. And Brian and I met when I was leaving traditional work, going into entrepreneurship. And I remember meeting him one time at some conference somewhere. We had a breakfast and I was just really impressed because he was like, I don't know how to explain this since we're on the man show right now. I really want to say like he was one of the most masculine dudes I'd ever met, but like in the most loving way. He was the guy that was like, no, man, you got to go flip that tire. Like you need to get out there and get your fucking hands dirty and be that guy and be okay with that kind of energy that you get as a guy. And you need to expend that energy and you need to be out there and cultivate your world. And he was really about that, but in a loving, vulnerable, humble way where he was patient with me and knew that I didn't have that kind of confidence in myself as a man. And so all these people, like those four people that I just listed, every single one of them at some point in my evolution as a man had made an impact on very specific parts of either freeing my mind, giving me like gifts of resilience and understanding hard work, but also at the same time, like being safe harbors for me. Like we all need that as men. We need some place we can go be our shittiest version of ourselves. We just have to be. We're seriously like we're guys who sit there and go, like, I'm dealing with this, I'm struggling with this sucks. Like I don't know, I'm throwing my hands up, and they're the ones who can deal with it in an appropriate way where they're not mad at you, they're not upset with you, they're not surprised, they're not blown away and feeling like you're just so far gone. They're like, and they're also not impressed. That was the thing that I love about all those guys. They're not impressed with me. Like if you see my Instagram or follow me on LinkedIn or like you watch me on stage, you have people are like, wow. Never, those guys would never utter those words out of their mouth being like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. No, they knew that I should be doing what I'm doing. They knew that I could do more. And they always were there to be like, hey, let me just be the person who's unimpressed with you, who understands that you're a man first, you're a husband, you're a father, you've got a life as a human being that you're trying to do. And I'm really interested in that guy and how he's doing. So I would say that every time I would be stuck at any point in my life, having men like that in my life have been what saved me, what has propelled me. And if without that, I don't even know where I'd be at all. Zero.
I mean, I love that. I think that one of the things I really like about what you just said, in one of the key threads that I just want to pull on a little bit, is those building those key relationships. Because you had told me that you have relationships with people in the NBA and some of the biggest events that out there, key relationships all over the country, all over the world. I think there's a thread here with like your mentors and that kind of stuff too. But what are some of the things that you have done or do that that you feel like has given you that edge to build these key relationships and have those doors there? And where do you attribute that to?
I honestly, it's hard to distill that down, but I will say this. Building relationships is a very intentional act, and it's a scary one. Like if you're sitting on here right now and you're listening to this podcast and you're going like, dude, I don't want to talk to anybody. Like, I get it. It's just really overwhelming. I feel that too. Even as an extrovert, like people think, oh, extroverts is so much easier because they can just go talk to anybody. They're not overthinking in their head about like, what that conversation is going to be like, or if they're saying the right thing or the wrong thing. I think that what honestly I knew is that if there are people that I can serve, and there are people that I need to literally get over myself to go meet. And in many cases, it's usually that most of the time we meet people, there's always an agenda. There's always like, oh, well, what can they do for me? Right. And I think that people are leery of that. In fact, they're very aware of it. So, yes, you mentioned I have all these really cool, elevated relationships with people that are making big impacts in the worlds that they run in. But a lot of that came from me just being genuinely curious and honestly trying to figure out a way to serve them in not a weird way. Like they don't, by the way, none of them need me. Like none of them do. And so me going into them be like, hey man, how can I help you? Like they don't want that. What they want is like somebody who's just not impressed with them and doesn't feel like they have to be on all the time. There's a really cool way of going up to people and feeling like you belong there. And I love that with some of the relationships that I have with people that might have an elevated status. It's just like, okay, cool. Like you're a human being too. I think you're really cool. I like what you're doing. I just wanted to be able to introduce myself. And then from there, it's always gone on to be like, me being curious, me being interested, me being genuine and following up. Gosh dang. If we just had more people, more guys in the world who are just intentional. Like when's the last time you wrote a thank you card, guys? Like it probably never. And so a lot of those relationships that I've had early on in my career and all that stuff was just me, one, having the guts to go up and just like say, hey, right, with no intentions, no agenda. Also being kind of like servant minded in the way it's being like, man, how could I add value here without being the weirdo that's like, how can I help you and add value? Like, you don't need to do that. And then the third one is genuinely like following up and staying in touch with people. Like the Rolodex that I have now is because a lot of times people meet people, they might say hi, they might exchange numbers, then they never hear from them again. Some of it's just me being intentional about just the follow up and being like, hey, I'm doing this, or hey, I can't go to the Suns game. It's courtside seats. Do you want them? For that is for you. But it's just that follow up because a lot of times our lives are busy. I get it. But that intentionality of caring about anything that anybody else is doing and the follow up with it was massive for building those relationships.
Man, I love what you just said. And one of the things that it made me think about in my life is the difference between intention and transaction.
Oh, that's good.
I spent most of my, because I was in sales for 15 years, and everything, and part of that journey was doing multi-level marketing, which if you've ever
Ooh,
met somebody in multi-level marketing,
I have.
it's all a fucking transaction.
It's all a transaction, always.
Where it's like they're always recruiting and always selling. And that's great. If you're in that business model, that's what you have to do to make it. And it's not, I didn't like what it did to me though. And
Mhm.
one of the things I've done over the last couple of years, I was tired about bitching about male friends. It's like, oh, maybe it's just me. It's like, no, it's not. It's just, I didn't have intention with men. The follow
Yeah.
up sucked to
Yeah.
where I would just rely on fate,
Yeah.
to
To
like,
run into people.
and to create friends.
Yeah.
And when I would meet people, especially if I had my salesman hat on, I would be always like, what can I get out of this person? And it turned me into a freaking douchebag, like just thinking about transactions. So that's what I loved about what you had said of that intentional connection with somebody that's just across you who just happens to be another human being,
Mhm.
and figuring out where that connection is. And I think that you carry yourself in a way that is, you have a cool factor to you that I don't necessarily have.
Oh
I don't.
man, tell that to my wife and kids.
Yeah,
They're
well, I
like
mean,
want to record. I know I want to record it and tell them because they forget sometimes.
well, from the marketing nerd introvert in me, I'm like, hey man, he's got just a cool swag to him, like that just. But that's your persona on stage.
Yeah.
I know that's not
Yeah.
something you carry throughout the rest of your life, and that's someone that you do
I
take
here's the
highest
thing.
energy of you.
But I do care. I care too much about, like I said, if I'm a perception person, right? I care a lot about what I look like and smell like and feel like to others. So in a way, that is huge for building relationships because you can be whatever people want you to be. That's not a
Right?
good thing, by the way. Like, I'm not
No.
saying that's a good thing, but there are a lot of really successful salespeople and business people who have figured out a way to blend into wherever they happen to end up. And I've had a unique ability to do that my whole life and really relate well with people. So like I've always been really perceptive. I saw you were wearing a Superman shirt. I had a million things to talk about with Superman. Like I knew that if I was going to build a relationship or I was going to talk to you, I would find some way or something that we had common ground on.
Hmm.
And that was always really a huge benefit. Now, here's the crazy part. If that's disingenuous, like if I came off like smelling like MLM and I was coming in and I just was like, yo, Superman, huh? Yeah, totally. Like the comic book, the original. What is it? What's your favorite superpower? It's like, no, it's a red flag. But if I come in and I'm like, dude, I wish I could wear my Superman shirt more. It's a very different conversation because like, why can't you? Like, oh, I don't know, because like I feel like sometimes I don't want to be like come out as a nerd, but I love when people do it because there's a whole different thing that happens
Mm-hmm.
than that. So I think that part of it has always been being able to just be very aware of my circumstances and being able to like just blend in and evolve and be able to reactively do that. But you're right. There is a persona on stage. There's a persona out there where it's like you're bigger than life and you step into that character for a minute. But at home and among my really close friends, I'm still the guy that like sometimes I can't tie my shoes on my own because my stomach is too big. you know. So I think it's
Yeah.
fun. I think it's fun the juxtaposition between those two worlds. But yeah, I think that part of the cool factor comes from being super hyper aware of your environment and then
Mm.
also for better or worse stepping into that persona a bit.
Yeah, I like that. So this is bringing out some thoughts in me. So the social, I used to be this very good at social chameleon, and it's a really good salesperson skill. If you can blend into any
Right.
and connect with any person from like strategic rapport building, and
Yep.
but if you let that go too far, you lose who you are. Like
Tons.
your authentic self is a reflection of the person that you're with.
Right.
You become who you think they want you to become
Right.
just because you're mirroring them. But if you do that, and I did that too much, it got out of
Mhm.
hand. And all of a sudden I was like, who the fuck am I? Like, what are my
Yeah.
values?
Yeah.
What kind of man am I? Like,
Mhm.
uh, and it's a slippery slope, man.
Yeah.
So I feel that you have to be able to blend a little bit, but
Yeah.
don't let your colors dilute too far, right?
Yeah, but I feel like it's a social awareness, right? You walk into a room and you can quickly understand the dynamic. Who's
Mm.
the alpha, who's not, what's going on. Like you can just start to pick up on like cues if you're just aware. Sometimes I have a ton of time to figure that out. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm not the person that has to have all the attention. So I can sit back and watch how things work. And then when I insert myself, it's very intentional. I know exactly the dynamic and how I'm supposed to act and all that stuff. Sometimes though, you're just thrust into things, right? And you can't help but be your authentic self. Like you can just get out there, and for better or worse, like whoever that person shows up in that environment is what it is. I think that I've realized where it's gone the way you just said, when you start to other people in your life go, what are you doing? Like, what is this? This is not like, this isn't the person I used to know or whatever. And those are really good, because sometimes that can be really frustrating. That can be a response that's very upset and aggressive because you don't want people to call that out in you. But if you trust them and you really care about them, it's a really good check. It's a really good to be like, oh man, I'm literally becoming other people and I'm not truly doing that, which puts you on that journey like you were on, which is, well, who am I? What is the authentic part of me that needs to show up every day? And how am I cool with that? Like, how do I get comfortable with that guy, you know? And the scary part about that is that changes relationships and friends and everybody else. Like sometimes when you really lean into your authentic self, like a lot of those people who liked your other person you were trying to be, they go away. And that's a scary thing for people. But I feel like if I've just let my weird fly a little bit and let myself get out there and I've attracted a lot of really incredible people in my life. So that's another thing. I don't mean to go on a tangent here, but when you said this before, like about building relationships, a lot of times it's just you putting your authentic self out there in the world. And like when you do that in a really authentic, amazing way, that you're just kind of like really stepping into who you are and you feel comfortable in your own skin, you attract people that totally identify with that. And all of a sudden it's like you walk into a room and no matter how cool you are, the coolness comes from like the confidence you have in you and just being okay with who you are. It attracts all kinds of people. It disarms them. Like you have a way better shot at creating authentic relationships that way.
Man, I feel like we go for another half hour here, but we're running out of time. I love that you said that. And there's a few, and you said so many things that I feel like you've already answered this question, but I'm going to put you on the spot and have you answer it near the end, just see where it comes out.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to be a man to you?
It's so hard because I don't know how many, I've got a faith life as well, and something that I don't always get to talk about. So I'm a Christian, but I also know that comes with a ton of baggage. So if anybody just turned off the podcast, I don't ascribe to the religiosity of that. I do love putting myself at a place where I have to feel like there's something bigger than me as a man. And that to me feels like there is something to accomplish. There's something to cultivate. In fact, I feel very deep down, and I can't speak because all men are the same at all. Like, in fact, it's just become, there's such a wide spectrum of that word. But for me personally, the cultivation and the idea that you are a part of something that's bigger than you makes me feel like there's a responsibility to go out in the world and to seek out ways to make it better. So I like the idea that I have big muscles. I like the idea that I can grow a beard. I like the masculine things about me. I do, because those are unique advantages in this world, especially we're not hunting and gathering anymore. I can't speak for people in Alabama and Georgia where we are. They're still doing all that stuff. But I do feel like masculinity, or being a man, is much more about the way you live your life rather than the physical attributes or whatever that creates a man or not a man. So I think that it's the intentionality of cultivation. And I feel like that part for me has been really cool, because cultivation is a heavy word. It's like cultivating yourself, right? So I literally struggle all the time with that. I struggle with waking up every day, reading my Bible or journaling. It sounds terrible to me. But I know that that's important. And I also know, like, seeking out other people and getting into community and finding those things that I actually need, the things that are good for me, like that cultivation is important. The second outside of that is that you have to cultivate relationships around you, and those go in a pecking order. Like me, there's nothing more important than my wife. She just is always top of mind. It's probably why if we ever fight, it's just because, like, I care so much about what she thinks. And if she has, like it goes to this whole thing. And then it's my girls, my kids. Like I know that everything I do is for them, and I want them to be happy when they cry and they're upset. Man, it just tears me to pieces, like breaks my heart. And then I think outside of that, it's the other relationships in your life, the ones that you hold close to you there. So I think being a man is definitely circles of cultivation. And that's the best way I can really describe it, is that there's a heavy responsibility with that, which tends to break us, but also at the same time feels very innate to me.
Yeah, man. I love that question because I get a great response every single time.
Yep.
So there's another one of the things that I think missing from a lot of content is baby steps and momentum. Because it's so easy to look at someone like yourself and be like, oh, well, that's Marcus because he's got this and that and this and that and stuff. But if you were to put your professorial hat on and give the men listening to this who might be stuck or where they're at on something to do over the next 7 days to get them some quick wins in their life, and based on the topics we've talked about today, what would be that one thing, that frog that you would feed them for the next 7 days?
Honestly, I feel like the best thing that anybody could do over the next 7 days, based on our conversation right now, is to, day one, sit down and write out a list of men that you respect. I'm talking about people that there's two types. There's an unobtainable mentor. That's somebody that's like just your mentor from afar. You read their books, you watch their show, you listen to their podcast. You might never meet them. You might, but they're not like in your life on a consistent basis. And I would put a list together of those people. Like, who are the people that I look up to? Who are the men that I actually feel like can mentor me from afar? Then I would do another list of being like, who are those men in my life that are ahead of me in whatever aspects? Doesn't mean they're older than you. Doesn't mean they can be if that's a part of what you need. But I do think it's people in areas of your life like wellness and health and finances and leadership. And for those pillars are for you, finding those people that are a click ahead of you or feel like they actually are doing that one particular aspect of their lives well, is putting that list together. The next one is putting a list together of 5 people that you honestly feel like you want to live your life with. Like, that is probably something. It's funny because I'm saying all these things out loud to you. I've done part of them, but also I, on a consistent basis, should be doing this audit in my own life, is saying, who are those 5 people? Because those 5 people are massively important. That's who you become. That is who influences your life. Those people are very intentional. And you should also be like thinking about, wow, how can I invest in their lives? But really, those 5 guys that are living life with you are very, very important. I feel like, by the way, if you just did that, just put that together without any context, is super valuable. But the next several days of this, the day 6 of the day 2 of this, is reaching out to that 5, like those close guys, and being very intentional and saying, hey, like, I want you guys in my life. I want to be more intentional. What are the mechanism? What are the tools that we need to stay in touch? Is it a group text? Is it a whatever? Are we meeting for coffee once a week? Are we doing it once a month? I don't know how everybody works, but those are very important. The next day, I would say, look at that second tiered list and think about like asking someone to intentionally mentor you. Like, I feel like mentorship is brushed under the rug, or maybe it's talked about, but it's not. There's no structure to it. Mentorship is action. It is an active role that somebody is saying they're committing to you in your life in a various aspect to be able to be there for you and to be intentional with that time. And that has to be a lot of structure. And that really should be somebody who's saying, hey, I'm going to give you this much time. I'm going to make sure that I'm available to you, because that's them making a commitment to your life. And those mentors ebb and flow, but that is really important to identify that person and be proactive about reaching out to them and laying out what mentorship could look like, right? Like, that's really, really important. And then the next day, I would really look at those sources, those other men that are those North Star men that you wrote down, and figure out how to incorporate more of their content, what they're doing, what they've handed down. Because the majority of those guys probably have a body of work that you can look at, which can be a blueprint or a prototype for you to be able to go out and say, okay, cool. Somebody, and this is fun because those people could be like dead, long gone. They could be people that, yeah, authors from way back in the day, who knows? But you can sit there and understand that they have literally provided a body of work and a roadmap to having a life that you admire. And so it's good to dissect that and spend that time going through their life's work. It's funny. Ryan Dice said something to me one time. He's the CEO of a company called Digital Marketer, and was scalable and a bunch of other stuff, but we spent a lot of time together. And one of the things he told me that he does, which I think is so good, is that he'll find an author or find somebody he really loves, and then he'll find their family tree. So everybody is influenced by somebody else. right? Every single person is influenced. So if you find the body of work from an author that you love and then they cite somebody within their book or their work, then you go to that person and you read all the stuff that they have. And if they cite somebody, you go all the way back until you get to a place where there's an original thought that you'll never find. But that is so cool, because if we start thinking about it as men, we go, wow, who are the men that I really admire, that I read and that I meditate on and that I think about? And then I look at their sources and I start to figure out who influenced them. And then it gets this really cool thing that brings you all the way back to some really crazy original thoughts that might have, for whatever reason, had different textures on them that got you the person that you admire. So I love that. And by the way, 7 days of this, just literally writing out those lists, following up with those people, being intentional, it's way more than 7 days. But I feel like if anybody could actually go do something that's most actionable, it's making the targets, following up with them, and then being intentional about the actions involved with getting the core group around you, finding the mentors, and then finding the body of work that can be a blueprint for you as a man, which is cool.
Wow. That was awesome, man. So I think that be careful, man. Maybe he just covered a lot. And if you're capable of implementing all that, fantastic. Or just take a bite-sized piece and have that be the bar. And then on some days you could overshoot your headlights, right? But on other days, keep that bar with you, something you could do consistently, sustainably for day in and day out. So Marcus, I know we're running out of time here, so I really appreciate you being here. I mean, the men, if they want to ask you questions, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. That's the best place to connect with you.
Yeah, LinkedIn is always the place to connect, and the messages get a little crazy, as everyone knows here on LinkedIn. But I like when people write in the subject line that your podcast name or something. I'll totally know exactly where that is. But yeah, man, I always got time. I like hearing from people. So yeah, LinkedIn is definitely a good spot.
Cool. And I just want to honor you for the man that you are, the amount of intentionality that you've invested in yourself, and your humbleness, and just how much I appreciate men like you in my life. And I just want to honor you for a second for all of the work, all of the hard days you've gone through recently, and the man that you are, that is unflappable for your wife and for your kids, is admirable. And I appreciate that about you.
Well, there's two things then, because I'm not going to let you give me a compliment without giving you one. I love that you created this space for men. I think it's really cool that you're doing this, and I want to encourage you to keep doing it into perpetuity, because it's just something that there needs to be a space for this. The second thing is I hope all the listeners out there understand that I am a complete work in progress. As much as I have enjoyed different parts of my life that are successful, I can be a way better husband. I can be a way better dad. Gosh, I could be a way better husband and dad. And when it comes to business, it's like, yeah, man, I would love to reach out to more guys and not get stuck, but I do. And things happen where they're really hard, and there's high highs and low lows. And I'm just praying every day for more of the highs and more of the balance, right? But I just want to take that pressure off you guys, because even the most successful people in the world, they have the same struggles and the same things that they're going through, maybe privately and not as public. But it is a wonderful thing to see that this is a long journey and it's not a short sprint, right? This marathon that we were doing. And so being able to be around more guys and being able to be more vulnerable like this and share those things is how we know that we're just not some broken thing. And if I can just literally, if I could inspire anybody to just be able to come out and to another man and say, this is the worst version of myself. Sorry, here it is, right? We would all be better. We would just literally, if we could find that safe harbor in another guy, I mean, that's the frog, right? It's just finding that safe harbor for yourself and another dude. That's going to be really helpful. So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you leaving us with that golden nugget, and I really appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, dude.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Resisting Beta podcast. Here's where I need your help. I'd love for you to give us a review on your favorite podcast player. Also, follow us on TikTok and Instagram, and share this message out to a man that needs to hear it, because that's how we impact this world. Thank you very much. Make it a great day, men.